FHS season tickets.
Welcome into another episode of FHS Season Tickets. I'm Michael, and I'm joined by a guest today, Tim Shoemaker from 11 Warriors. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Tim Shoemaker. Cover Ohio State football and basketball for 11warriors.com. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. I write about and cover, travel to a bunch of different Ohio State football and basketball games, and get paid to write about them. So.
Okay, and we're going to start off talking about Ohio State football. First thing, the college football playoff rankings came out yesterday, and Ohio State was ranked 5th. Do you have any thoughts on that ranking, where they are right now, and where you think they could be in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, I think that was probably right where a lot of people thought Ohio State would fit into the mix. The 4 teams ahead of them, Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, and Washington are all still undefeated. Ohio State obviously has 1 loss right now to Penn State a few weeks ago. I think Ohio State's in a pretty good spot just in terms of, these rankings don't necessarily mean much of anything until the final ones come out. So Ohio State is in a good position now to where if they win out, obviously with the regular season finale against Michigan, a chance to kind of jump ahead into that top 4, which is ultimately where they want to be. So, yeah, I wasn't really surprised. I think a lot of people thought maybe they could sneak ahead of Washington based on, how the committee voted last week, where they had Texas A&M ahead of Washington. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. And I think Ohio State's in a good spot to where if they win out and beat Michigan at the end of the year and then go on to win the Big Ten championship, they'll be one of the Final 4 teams.
Yeah, a lot of people have used the term that the Buckeyes control their own destiny in making a college football playoff. I agree with that to an extent, but that is only if Michigan does win out until the Ohio State game, because if Michigan loses before the Ohio State game and Penn State wins out, then Ohio State would be left as an 11-1 team with a loss at Penn State, who could be the Big Ten title winners. So then you might have the question, do you take a 2-loss Penn State who beat Ohio State, or an 11-1 Ohio State or Michigan? That would be, Michigan would have 2 losses, but that would be an interesting scenario to see play out if Michigan does fall in one of the games and Penn State makes the Big Ten title game.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Ohio State doesn't technically control its own destiny. That's important here. But I think a lot of people are just kind of assuming that Michigan won't lose because they only have Iowa and Indiana left on the schedule before Ohio State. Those are 2 teams that they should beat. They'll be double-digit favorites in both games. But college football is nuts, so it's hard to say with 100% certainty that Michigan is going to win out until that Ohio State game. But it's certainly likely. But another thing, Penn State if Penn State loses another game, that kind of gives Ohio State some breathing room in terms of Michigan could still lose a game then before the Ohio State game if Penn State loses. But again, Penn State has a rather easy schedule too, so it's looking more and more likely like all 3 teams are going to win out until the Ohio State-Michigan game there on November 26th.
Yeah, but you mentioned that would give Ohio State breathing room. The loss to Penn State wouldn't look as good. So there are a lot of variables in play. I still think that if Ohio State does what they need to do, they'll be in the college football playoff. And I'm going to ask you about your Curtis Samuel article, like comparing him to Percy Harvin. How do you think he's been this year, and do you think he should maybe get some Heisman votes? I've seen a good amount of Ohio State fans asking for him maybe to be in the Heisman running. I personally don't agree with it, but what's your thoughts on Curtis Samuel and how he's been this year?
Yeah, he's been really good. He's one of, in my opinion, one of the best players in college football. And I think he's got 600 rushing yards, 675 receiving yards on the season. He's actually been used more than Urban used Percy Harvin at Florida, which is kind of crazy to think about. But as far as the Heisman goes, that's pretty tough. I think Curtis is in a tough spot too when it comes to the Heisman because he and JT Barrett are essentially going to split some votes. I would think, take some votes away from each other. I don't think that he's finalist necessarily right now, but I think he could, definitely get into the conversation. I think the Heisman Trophy is pretty much decided anyway, but and Louisville quarterback Lamar Jackson is going to win that. But Curtis Samuel's been a really good player all season, and kind of the biggest issue for Ohio State has been trying to figure out how to get him the ball enough. What is enough? What is the proper number of touches for him, proper number of carries, receptions, those kind of things. That's kind of something that the staff has worked on all year, trying to get Curtis involved in the offense. He was, really, really good on Saturday against Nebraska. Had near 180 all-purpose yards. He had 13 total touches, and that was, he obviously didn't play in the fourth quarter there. But he's such a dynamic player, and you can get him the ball in so many different ways. They line him up at Wildcat quarterback. They hand him the ball out of the backfield, and then obviously, I think where he's most effective is as a slot receiver. So he's a super dynamic player. I think he's Ohio State's obviously most explosive player on offense, and one of the best players in the Big Ten in the country.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel can do a lot of different things. Another player that can do a lot of different things is Jabril Peppers, and a lot of people have been comparing Malik Hooker and Jabril Peppers. Who would you rather have on your team if you were starting up a defense and a team in general?
You put me on the spot there. Well, first of all, like Jabril Peppers, he played. I think that comparison comes from, Jabril Peppers played safety for the most part, defensive back, nickel back last year, but he's primarily playing linebacker this year, outside linebacker, kind of similar to the position that Darren Lee played for Ohio State the last couple of years, the one Chris Worley plays now. It's kind of a hybrid linebacker position. So Jabril Peppers and Malik Hooker aren't really the same kind of player, but they are both just high impact guys defensively. So if you're asking me to choose one, that's a really difficult question. I think Peppers kind of has shown the ability to play offense and do kind of things that Malik Hooker hasn't shown yet. Not saying he can't do it. He just hasn't had to do it. You know what I mean? So I think Peppers is just the way I think Malik Hooker is a unique talent too. Though he's, I think both are going to be first round draft picks whenever they decide to go pro. So I don't think you can go wrong with either one.
Not picking sides, okay. Interesting.
Trying to stay neutral, man.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's hard to stay neutral sometimes, though.
Right.
And I think that just about wraps it up for Ohio State football. Now we're going to jump into Ohio State basketball. I've been reading a couple articles on Ohio State basketball. One from Mark Titus, writer for The Ringer. Really enjoy The Ringer. And he wrote a lot of interesting stuff about Thad Matta, how he used to be a really young and exciting coach, and now he's kind of started falling off and lacking 3 straight years without a Sweet 16 appearance, he mentioned, and he just really said that he hasn't had the same success they had at the start of his career. What kind of a position do you think Thad Matta is in right now, and how do you expect them to be this season?
Yeah, it's interesting because Thad, like you mentioned, he achieved so much success at Ohio State so early and so quickly, like that a lot of people. He kind of raised the standard so fast that a lot of people kind of just expected Ohio State basketball to be, contending for the Big Ten championship and making Final Four runs every single season. And, that's really, really hard to do in college basketball, especially at a place like Ohio State, which isn't necessarily a basketball school, basketball program, an elite level basketball program, I should say. It's kind of in that second tier, in my opinion. There's been a little bit of unrest within the fan base. The last 3 seasons of Ohio State basketball haven't been great, and I think a lot of people got really, really frustrated last year, obviously, with the program missing the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2008. But with that said, Thad, I think, has built up enough credibility, and I think he'll hold this job until he decides that he doesn't want to coach anymore, unless things really, really start to go downhill this year and maybe even next year too. But I think Ohio State will be, as far as what they'll be like this year. They return their top 6 guys. from last year's team. They bring in a recruiting class that will kind of fill in some holes that they lost due to transfers at the end of last season. I think they're going to be an improved team, but kind of the success of the team kind of really depends on the strides made by the guys who came back. They have a talented core back, but it is a core that didn't make the NCAA tournament, so you have to keep that in mind. I think that they'll be much better. I would be really surprised if Ohio State didn't make the tournament this year. Will they compete for the Big Ten title? Probably not. They're probably still a year away from that, because you have to remember they still only do it. They still are kind of a relatively young team, even though they have a lot of guys back. Only one senior. The rest are kind of either in that junior, sophomore, or freshman class.
Yeah, I totally agree with the fact that they should be making the NCAA tournament. I don't see them being anywhere close to the Big Ten title. Just think that teams like Indiana and Michigan State are so much better. But they are a young team, and they only do have one senior. They're kind of in a similar position to Vanderbilt was last season and 2 seasons ago. I'm a huge Vanderbilt fan, kind of weird, from Cleveland, Ohio. But yeah, they were in a similar situation where they returned a lot of guys from an okay team, and they had really high expectations. It was really disappointing, and they still only had one senior the past couple years, and that was due to recruiting classes and a lot of guys transferring. And Thad Matta kind of has had the same problem. A lot of his players on his recruiting class have transferred. Was that a point of concern for you as an Ohio State fan? Because I definitely was concerned as a Vanderbilt fan when I believe our 2013 basketball recruiting class, everybody transferred out of the program by their sophomore season. That was just a huge red flag for me. But did you ever sense that with Thad Matta, or since he's rebounded really well with his previous recruiting classes, it's all good now?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if I was necessarily concerned. It was definitely eye opening though, because any way you cut it, when you lose 4 out of 5 kids in one class within a year, that something's not right. So it definitely raised the attention of a lot of people, caught a lot of people's eyes and ears and all that kind of stuff. But Thad's with Ohio State, you mentioned transfers and things like that. They've lost a few guys to transfers, but really what's kind of hurt them has been in previous years anyway, had been the early entries to the NBA draft. They lost after 2013. They lost Deshaun Thomas a year early than maybe a lot of people expected. They lost LaQuinn Ross a year early. He went undrafted. And then obviously, D'Angelo Russell came to Ohio State for the 2014-15 season, and when he came here to Columbus, nobody really viewed him as a one-and-done player. Even when he signed with Ohio State, it was kind of thought that he would be here for at least 2 years, and then kind of they would see where he was at. But he was just way better than anybody really ever expected, and kind of it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to prepare for that kind of stuff when you lose a guy who did so much for the team, and you really didn't have and this is kind of falls on the staff a little bit. They kind of weren't necessarily prepared for that right away, and that's tough to do sometimes, but that's part of the job, I guess. So losing D'Angelo Russell probably a year before they thought they were going into the season. In addition to losing, before D'Angelo's season, they lost a 5-man senior class, so they had lost a ton of talent from that team, and that kind of led to last year's performance, which was not great. When you lose 6 guys or whatever, and you have essentially no experience coming back, it can make for a bumpy ride, and that's kind of essentially what exactly happened there. Ohio State was really bad in the non-conference, and that kind of caught up to them.
And where would you rank the Big Ten as a conference in general? Where do you think they match up to the likes of the ACC?
Yeah, recently I would say the Big Ten has been arguably the best conference in the country. I don't think it will be this year. I think the ACC is really loaded this season. But I think the Big Ten might. I don't know if down years is the word that I'm looking for, but I look at Indiana, Michigan State, and Wisconsin as kind of the 3 top teams in the Big Ten, and I don't even know, who of those 3 would be what I would consider, national title Final Four contenders right now. But after those three, I mean, you've got Purdue, which is going to be pretty solid. Then kind of Ohio State, Michigan, Maryland, kind of fall into that next tier. And I'm probably forgetting somebody too, but yeah, I think the Big Ten is kind of strong in the middle, and they've got some pretty good teams at the top. But I don't think that they can match up with the likes of maybe the ACC in terms of the teams at the top of the conference this year, with Carolina and Duke and Virginia and all those teams. That the ACC is really stacked. So I would say that, in my opinion, the ACC is probably going to be the best conference in the country, and then the Big Ten, the Pac-12, Big 12 kind of are all maybe in that next tier after the ACC.
Yeah, I would probably rank the conferences ACC 1, Big 12 2, Big 10 3rd, and then probably a pretty significant drop-off after there. The ACC is very top-heavy, as you mentioned. Got teams like Duke, North Carolina, Syracuse, Virginia, North Carolina State, a team I'm really excited to see. Want to see how they work their point guards, Dennis Smith, and also Cleveland native Markel Johnson into the mix. That should be a very fun team to watch. I actually came up with the last question. Tate Martell is a guy I've been watching a good amount on from Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on him and also the receiver, forget his name, I believe he's a 5-star recruit, and how you think Ohio State, they've kind of almost set up a camp at Bishop Gorman and have recruited a lot of their guys, and they're starting to take a lot of them. How do you expect them to transition to Ohio State in the next couple of years?
Yeah, they're going heavily after the Bishop Gorman kids in 2017, and kind of leading that charge is Tate Martell, who's a talented quarterback out there from Vegas. You mentioned the receiver Tyjon Lindsey. They've also got the Haskell Garrett, a defensive tackle, committed from Bishop Gorman, and they're going after a safety from there, Bubba Bolden, as well. So there's potential for Ohio State to land 4 kids from the same high school in the same recruiting class, and that's crazy in itself. But the fact that it's from a program not really anywhere close to Columbus, out in Vegas, it kind of makes it even more crazy, in my opinion. And I think you're a different kind of quarterback than Ohio State has on the roster. He's obviously a smaller guy. They've got Dwayne Haskins in the class before him, Emory Jones in the class after him. They're both bigger quarterbacks, more of the in the pocket passer mold, but can also run. Tate's kind of a smaller guy, so he's more run first maybe, but he can no doubt throw the ball too. Tyjon Lindsey is one of the top receivers in the country, the top slot receiver probably. He's tiny, but he's very quick, and is going to be a great weapon for Urban Meyer's offense in the slot and kind of in that H receiver mold. Haskell Garrett's a defensive tackle who will come in and fight for snaps from day one to try and get into that defensive line rotation. And if they land Bubba Bolden at safety, that's just another guy that they have back in the secondary, which is playing at a really high level right now. So Bishop Gorman's certainly a program that Ohio State hit hard this year, and you have to wonder, now that they did that, if that kind of opens up some doors for some future recruiting classes as well.
Yeah, really is incredible what Ohio State's able to do at Bishop Gorman. Before we wrap it up, any questions you have for me about anything?
No, man. I wish I would have, been active and stuff and doing stuff like you're doing right now. But back when I was in high school, so anytime you need to talk about Ohio State or anything like that, man, feel free to give me a call. So I'm happy to help you out, and hope I can drop some knowledge on you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show. And that will wrap it up for this episode of FHS Season Tickets. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe for more season ticket videos.